All right, so the second section in this unit is all about the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Let's review real quick. This is all for the quadratic equation. These are just two new methods that we are learning for how to solve the quadratic equation. So again, the quadratic equation in standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Okay? So once we have it in this form, then we can decide now which method we want to use to solve. So remember, always try the zero factor property method first. Factor it, set them equal to 0. If that does not work, then use the quadratic formula. Only use the square root property method if it's already in the proper format, either something that looks like m squared equals something, or the perfect square trinomial that equals something. Unless it says that you have to use the square root property method and it's not in the proper format, that is the only time you should be completing the square. Okay? So now we're going to talk about the quadratic formula. And if you notice, it says x equals, and then on the right side of the equation is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Every letter that is on the right side is actually in our quadratic equation some number. They're all just numbers here. So the quadratic formula is kind of cool because it's all just numbers. So let's look at some examples. Okay, so 4x squared minus 11x minus 3 equals 0. So the first thing I need to do is look and see if this is in standard form, which it is. And in this case, actually, I could factor this one because 4 times 3 is 12. 1 and 12, if I made it a positive 1 and a negative 12. However, positive 1 and a negative 12. When I add those two together, I get negative 11. Positive times a negative is a negative. So I could factor this one, which is normally what we would want to do, but I'm trying to show you the quadratic formula. So let's look at this. A equals, and it's always the number, okay? B equals, and its sign. So this is negative 11, and C equals negative 3. Now what if A, B, or C was not there? Then your number would be 0. Okay, if it's not there, then it's just 0. Now all I do is take 4, negative 11, and negative 3 and put it into the quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Now, if you realize, as I was saying this, I was saying the generic formula, but I was writing in, and when I write A, B, and C right here instead of somewhere way over here, whatever, it's so easy for me to just glance up and see which numbers I need to grab, okay? And now all I have to do is the calculations. So x equals, negative times a negative is a positive. 11 squared, negative, when I'm squaring negative 11, negative times a negative is a positive, and 11 times 11 is 121. And now I look at negative 4 times positive 4 times negative 3. Well, that's a negative times a positive times a negative, so that comes out to be a positive. I always like to do the signs first, then I can multiply all the numbers. And 4 times 4 is 16, times 3. I happen to know this is 48, but you might not. So do your work over here. That's 18, 3 and 1, 4. So 48 over, and 2 times 4 is 8. Now, I need to, in the next step, add the 121. So that's 9, 6, 1. X equals 11 plus or minus the square root of 169 over 8. And then I get x equals 11 plus or minus the square root of 13. Let me just prove it. I happen to know this only because I do it so often. 3, 1, 9, 6, 1. See, 13 times 13, all over 8. Now again, as soon as you end up with a whole number here, no radical or i's or anything like that, split this into 2 separate equations, one with the positive, so 11 plus 13 over 8, and x equals 11 minus 13 over 8. And now do these separately. So I get x equals, let me see, that's 24 over 8. And this would be x equals negative 2 over 8. This one now is x equals 3 because 24 divided by 8 is 3. And I just need to reduce this to 1/4. And so my final answer is x equals negative 1/4 or 3. Again, write it like this, please, not like the book does. Okay? Pretty easy. Well, with practice maybe. Okay, so 2k squared plus 19 equals 14k. Well, the first thing I notice is that this is not in standard form. So I'm going to, and again, this is my squared term and he's positive. I want to keep him positive, so I'm going to put the 14k on the other side, on the left side. So I subtract him, plus 19 equals 0. Again, I'm going to, normally the first thing I would do is check to see if I could factor it. If I could, that's what I would do. If I couldn't, then I would use the quadratic formula. So a equals 2, b equals negative 14, and c equals 19. So now I'm ready to go. K equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. And again, if you say the generic while you're writing in, you will get this down so you can say it as fast as I can. Okay? So now we just need to do the calculations of the numbers. Negative times a negative is a positive, plus or minus. Again, negative times a negative is a positive, and I don't know what 14, believe it or not. I seem to know all the others, but I don't know this one. That's 16, that's 5, that's 4, 196. And now I've got negative times a positive, so that's going to be a negative. And I've got 19 times 8, because 4 times 2 is 8, so that's 72. So 152 over, and 2 times 2 is 4. So now, next step, k equals 14 plus or minus the square root of, and it's 196 minus 152, 44. So that's 44 over 4. Now I need to reduce my radical. So 14 plus or minus, and let's see, that's going to be 2 times 22 and 2 times 11, and that's it. So 2 times the square root of 11 over 4. Again, I cannot cross cancel the 14 and the 4 or the 2 and the 4, because the 14 is being added or subtracted with the 2 times the square root of 11. But I can factor a 2 out of this term and this term. So that leaves me with 7 plus or minus the square root of 11, because if I multiply 2 times 7, I get 14, and if I multiply 2 times the square root of 11, I get 2 times the square root of 11 over 4. And now, because the 2 is being multiplied with a quantity 7 plus or minus the square root of 11, I can cross-cancel these. And I must to get this into lowest terms. And so my final answer, again, please write it like this, not like the book does. Okay, there's our second example. Let's do one more. Okay, z plus 5 times the quantity z plus 1 equals 10z. Well, I look at this and I say, oh my gosh, this is nowhere near in standard form. That's the absolute first thing I need to do. So I'm going to start by foiling the 2 on the left. So that's z squared plus z plus 5. Z plus 5 equals 10z. Now I'm going to combine my like terms. Plus 5 equals 10z. I'm going to take the 10z and put it on the other side. So I get z squared minus 4z, because that's negative z, plus 6z gives me negative 4z equals 0. Now it's in standard form and I can decide which method I want to use. Again, always try the factoring first. But of course, we're just learning about the quadratic formula, so we're going to use that one. Okay, the coefficient in front of this guy is a 1. And then this one, b is negative 4. And c is negative 5. So now I'm ready to put it into the quadratic formula. So z equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay. Now we just need to do the calculations. Negative times negative is a positive. Negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. Negative times a positive times a negative is a positive. 4 times 1 is 4 times 5 is 20. Did I mess up somewhere? Excuse me, way back here, guys, you probably didn't catch me. Now wait, you probably didn't catch me. I put that as a negative. He needs to be a positive. This didn't change at all. So over here he's a positive and here he's a positive, which means negative times a positive is a negative. Watch for your signs always. And 2 times 1 is 2. So now I've got z equals 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 over 2. 2 equals, not 2, excuse me. Z equals 4 plus or minus, take out the I, over 2. Z equals, and I'm doing way more steps usually than you guys will need to do. But just so you get all the steps in your head, okay? Now again, I cannot cross cancel, so I can factor out a 2. That leaves me with 2 plus or minus I over 2. And then I can cross cancel the 2's. And my final answer is z equals 2 plus or minus I. And that's this unit, this section.